Welcome to DCF Investigations. In the annals of true crime history, there are names that instantly conjure images of terror. The Zodiac, the Night Stalker, the Golden State Killer. These monikers are etched into the public consciousness, their crimes dissected in countless books, films, and documentaries. But there are other names, equally terrifying, that have slipped through the cracks of history, obscured by the passage of time and the prejudices of the era in which they operated. Tonight, we turn our gaze to the fog-laden streets of San Francisco in the mid-1970s. We are going to walk the path of a phantom who haunted the bars and diners of the Castro district and the Tenderloin, a predator who used a sketch pad and a pencil as his lure. He was a silent artist who captured the likeness of his victims before taking their lives in a frenzy of violence. They called him the Doodler. This is not just a story about a serial killer. It is a story about a specific moment in time, a community on the brink of a revolution, and a justice system that failed to protect the vulnerable because of who they loved. We are going to dive deep into the files, the theories, and the lingering questions of a case that remains open and unsolved to this day. To understand the terror of the Doodler, we must first immerse ourselves in the atmosphere of San Francisco in 1974. The city was a beacon, a lighthouse calling out to the disenfranchised and the dreamers from across America. The summer of love had faded, but its spirit had morphed into something new. For the LGBTQ+ community, San Francisco was becoming a mecca. People were fleeing small towns and restrictive families to find a place where they could breathe, where they could live authentically. The Castro district was transforming from a working-class Irish Catholic neighborhood into the beating heart of the gay rights movement. Harvey Milk was beginning his rise to political prominence. There was a sense of euphoria, a feeling that the world was finally changing. But beneath this vibrant surface of liberation and disco balls, there was a darker undercurrent. It was a time of immense transition and instability. The Zodiac Killer had recently terrorized the Bay Area, leaving a scar on the collective psyche of the region. The Zebra murders, a series of racially motivated killings, were causing panic in the streets. And within the gay community itself, there was a complex relationship with law enforcement. Homosexuality had only recently been decriminalized in some aspects, but sodomy laws and public decency statutes were still used as bludgeons. To be outed was to risk losing one's job, one's family, and one's housing. Police raids on gay bars were less frequent than in the decades prior, but the trust between the SFPD and the community was fragile, if not non-existent. It was into this specific cultural fissure that the Doodler stepped. He did not have to force his way into the lives of his victims. He was invited. Witnesses described him as a young African-American man, slim, well-dressed, and soft-spoken. He possessed a disarming quietness. He would sit at the bar in places like the truck stop or the cabaret, nursing a drink, with a sketchbook open in front of him. He wasn't aggressive, he was observant. When he spotted a potential victim, he would begin to draw. He would sketch their portrait, capturing their features with a skill that impressed those who saw his work. He would then approach the man, showing him the drawing. It was a flatterer's gambit, a moment of connection in a loud, crowded room. "I drew this for you," he might imply. It was an icebreaker that lowered defenses immediately. The first body was found on January 24, 1974. The victim was Gerald Kavanagh, a 49-year-old Canadian immigrant. Kavanagh was a man who had built a life for himself in the city, working in a mattress factory. He was described by those who knew him as introverted, a man who kept to himself but was kind and reliable. He was a Catholic, a detail that speaks to the internal conflicts many men faced at the time, balancing their faith with their identity. His body was discovered at Ocean Beach, lying face up in the sand near the water's edge. The scene was gruesome. This was not a robbery gone wrong. Kavanagh had been stabbed repeatedly. The medical examiner would later count numerous wounds, indicating a level of rage and overkill that suggests a personal motive or a deep-seated psychopathology. There were defensive wounds on his hands, showing that he had fought for his life in the darkness of the beach, with the sound of the Pacific Ocean drowning out his cries. At the time, the police treated it as an isolated incident, a tragic homicide in a big city. They had no idea it was the beginning of a pattern. Months passed. The fog rolled in and out of the bay. Then, on June 25, 1974, another discovery was made. A woman walking her dog near Spreckles Lake in Golden Gate Park stumbled upon a body. It was Joseph Stevens, age 27. Stevens was a cabaret star, a man known for his wit and his talent. He had been named the Drag Queen of the Week just the day before his death. He was a figure of light in the community, someone who brought joy to others. He had been seen the previous night at the Cabaret Club on North Beach. Witnesses remembered him leaving with a young man who had been sketching in the bar. Stevens' body bore the same hallmarks of violence as Kavanagh's. He had been stabbed repeatedly, and his body was found in a location that was known as a cruising spot, a place where men met for anonymous encounters. The location was significant. The killer was targeting men in safe spaces, luring them to semi-secluded areas under the guise of intimacy, and then unleashing a torrent of violence. The link between the two murders was not immediately publicized. The term serial killer was not yet in common parlance in the way we use it today. Communication between different precincts was often slow, relying on paper files and telephone calls rather than centralized databases. But the pattern was becoming undeniable to the detectives on the ground. 2 weeks later, on July 7, 1974, the brutality escalated. The body of Klaus Christmann, a 31-year-old German national, was found. Christmann had a wife and children, a fact that added a layer of tragedy and complexity to the case. He was arguably living a double life, exploring his sexuality in San Francisco while maintaining a traditional family structure. His body was discovered at Ocean Beach, not far from where Gerald Kavanagh had been found months earlier. The violence inflicted on Christmann was particularly savage. His throat had been slashed in addition to multiple stab wounds. The police found a makeup tube in his pocket, a small detail that painted a picture of a man trying to navigate two worlds. The discovery of Christmann confirmed that a predator was hunting along the coastline and in the parks. The community began to whisper. Rumors circulated in the bars. Be careful who you go home with. Watch out for the guy with the sketchbook. But without the internet or social media, these warnings traveled slowly, often distorted by fear and hearsay. The fourth victim was Frederick Capin, aged 32. Capin was a decorated Vietnam War veteran, a man who had survived the jungles of Southeast Asia only to be cut down in his own city. He had won a medal for heroism, saving men under fire. He was working as a nurse, continuing a life of service. His body was found on May 12, 1975, nearly a year after the killings began, also at Ocean Beach. The long gap between Christman and Kappen suggests the killer may have been transient, or perhaps incarcerated for other offenses, or simply biding his time. Kappen's murder was particularly impactful because of his status as a veteran and a medical professional. The sand at Ocean Beach was becoming a graveyard. The final victim officially attributed to the Doodler was Harold Goldberg, a 66-year-old sailor of Swedish descent. His decomposing body was found on June 4, 1975, in a shallow cave near Lincoln Park Golf Course. Goldberg was older than the other victims, suggesting the killer's preferences were opportunistic rather than fixated on a specific age group. The pathology was the same: multiple stab wounds, a frenzy of violence. Goldberg had been dead for roughly 2 weeks before he was found, his body hidden away in the brush. 5 men, 5 lives extinguished. But the horror of the Doodler case lies not just in the dead, but in the living. There were survivors. And this is where the story takes a turn that is unique to the 1970s and the social stigma of homosexuality. In late 1975, police identified 3 men who had been attacked by the Doodler, but had managed to escape with their lives. These men were the key to solving the case. They had seen his face. They had spoken to him. They had watched him draw. One was a diplomat from Europe. Another was a well-known entertainer, a figure of some celebrity status. The third was never publicly characterized with a specific profession, but was also considered a man of standing. The investigation, led by Inspectors Rotea Guilford and Earl Sanders, who would later become the city's first black police chief, made a breakthrough. They found a suspect. Based on the descriptions from witnesses and the survivors, they detained a man. He fit the profile perfectly. He was a young African-American man with a background in art. He had been seen in the bars. He had been found with a sketch pad. The police brought the suspect in. They brought the survivors in to identify him. And this is where the system collapsed. The survivors refused to testify. To understand this refusal, we must step back into the shoes of a gay man in 1975. The diplomat faced the ruin of his career and an international scandal if his sexual orientation was revealed in a court of law. The entertainer faced the loss of his audience and his livelihood. The stigma was a weapon as deadly as the killer's knife. They looked at the suspect, they looked at the police, and they chose silence. They chose to protect their identities over seeking justice for the dead. We cannot judge them by modern standards. We cannot understand the sheer weight of the fear they carried. But the consequence was catastrophic for the investigation. Without the testimony of the victims, the police could not build a case. There was no DNA evidence to rely on. Fingerprinting was useful but not definitive without a match or a clear chain of evidence connecting the suspect to the crime scenes. The suspect sat in the interrogation room, and the police knew they had him. But they had to let him go. Inspector Guilford was quoted later, expressing his frustration. He said, "My feeling is he's the guy, but I can't prove it." The suspect walked free. He was never charged with the murders. The case of the Doodler went cold, frozen in time by the closet door that refused to open. Let us delve deeper into the profile of this suspect. Who was he? In the years since, details have leaked, though his name has never been officially released by the SFPD as the confirmed killer. At the time, he was described as a quiet man, perhaps suffering from mental health issues. During his interrogation, he reportedly did not deny the crimes, but did not confess to them either. He spoke in riddles. There were reports that he told the police he killed because he had issues with his own sexual identity, that he was lashing out at the men he was attracted to. A tragic cycle of internalized homophobia manifesting as external violence. Some sources suggest the suspect had a history of psychiatric treatments. There is a chilling anecdote that surfaced years later. At one point, the suspect called the police station. He spoke to the detectives. He allegedly said he was the Doodler and asked about the investigation. It was a taunt, a game of cat and mouse played by a man who knew the rules were in his favor. There are other theories, of course. Conspiracy theories always fill the vacuum left by unsolved crimes. Some have speculated that the Doodler was not one man, but a pair working together. Though the consistency of the witness descriptions makes this unlikely. Others have tried to link the Doodler to the Zodiac Killer, suggesting the Zodiac changed his MO. However, the Zodiac was a gun-and-cipher killer who craved public attention and media coverage. The Doodler was intimate, quiet, and used a knife. The psychological profiles are vastly different. The Zodiac wanted to terrorize the population. The Doodler wanted to destroy specific individuals in moments of vulnerability. Another theory posits that there were more victims. The official count is 5, plus the 3 survivors. But in a transient city like San Francisco, with young men arriving and disappearing every day, it is highly probable that there were others who were never connected to the series. Men who were listed as runaways, or whose deaths were written off as drug deals gone wrong or random muggings. The true toll of the Doodler may never be known. For decades, the case gathered dust in the basement of the Hall of Justice. The sketches of the victims, drawn by the killer, remained in the evidence boxes, a macabre gallery of the dead. The survivors lived their lives, carrying the secret of their encounter to their graves. The diplomat returned to his country. The entertainer continued his show. The families of Kavanaugh, Stevens, Chrisman, Kappen, and Goldberg were left with nothing but questions. But the story did not end in 1975. Cold cases have a way of resurfacing, especially as technology improves and societal attitudes change. In 2018, the San Francisco Police Department announced they were reopening the investigation. The cultural landscape had shifted. Being gay was no longer a reason to hide from a murder trial. DNA technology had advanced to a point where even minute traces of biological material could yield a profile. The police released a new sketch, not drawn by the killer, but an age progression image of what the suspect might look like today. They also released a sketch of the suspect from 1975, drawn by a witness. It showed a young man with a slim face and a cap. The authorities announced a $100,000 reward for information leading to an arrest. Commander Greg McEachern of the SFPD stated that they believed the suspect was still alive. This was a bombshell. The man who stalked the beaches of San Francisco 40 years ago might still be walking the streets, perhaps an elderly man now, living a quiet life. His dark past hidden behind wrinkles and gray hair. The police also revealed they had a specific person of interest. In interviews with the press, retired Inspector Dan Cunningham, who worked on the cold case, hinted that they knew exactly who the man was. He was described as still living in the East Bay area. This revelation sent shockwaves through the true crime community. If they knew who he was, why was there no arrest? The answer remains the same as it was in 1975. Evidence. Without the survivors, without the murder weapon, and perhaps with degraded physical evidence, the threshold for beyond a reasonable doubt is incredibly high. We must also consider the forensic limitations of the 1970s versus what is available now. In 1974, if the killer left saliva on a cigarette butt or skin cells under a victim's fingernails, it was often preserved poorly or not collected at all. Touch DNA was science fiction. If the evidence was not stored in climate-controlled conditions, it may have degraded to the point of being useless. The police are likely hoping for a confession, or for someone who knew the suspect back then to finally break their silence. There is a tragic irony in the legacy of the Doodler. He targeted a community that was fighting for the right to exist, and he used their need for connection against them. He exploited the secrecy that society forced upon gay men. In many ways, he was a predator created by the environment of the time. If the victims had felt safe enough to go to the police immediately, if the survivors had felt safe enough to testify, the killing spree might have been stopped sooner. The Doodler is a phantom of the closet, a monster who thrived in the shadows of oppression. Let's look closer at the specific geography of the crimes, as it paints a picture of the killer's routine. Ocean Beach and the areas around the Golden Gate Park were not just random dump sites. They were the edge of the world. Standing on Ocean Beach, looking west, there is nothing but water until Japan. It is a place of finality. For a killer who sketched his victims, an act of creation. To then leave them at the edge of the continent, an act of negation, suggests a profound psychological turmoil. He was preserving them on paper and erasing them in reality. The sketching itself is the most unique signature of this case. Serial killers often take trophies, jewelry, body parts, clothing. The Doodler created his own trophies. Did he keep the drawings? Are they tucked away in an attic somewhere in the East Bay, a portfolio of death? Or did he destroy them, the act of drawing being merely a tool for seduction? Witnesses said he was talented. This implies he had training. Did he go to art school? Was he a failed artist? Did he work as a draftsman? These are avenues of investigation that surely have been exhausted by detectives. Yet the public remains in the dark. And what of the survivors? The diplomat and the entertainer. Their identities have been the subject of intense speculation on message boards and in investigative journalism. Some names have been whispered, but out of respect for their privacy and the fact that they are likely deceased, we will not repeat unverified rumors here. However, their story forces us to ask a difficult question about the nature of justice. Is justice an absolute concept, or is it relative to the cost one must pay for it? For these men, the cost was too high. They survived the knife, but they could not survive the truth. As we stand here today, over 50 years since Gerald Kavanaugh was found on the sand, the case remains technically open. The suspect, if he is the man the police have identified, is in his late 60s or early 70s. He has lived a full life while his victims were frozen in their youth. Gerald Kavanaugh never got to see the acceptance of the LGBTQ+ community. Joseph Stevens never performed on a stage again. Klaus Christman never returned to his family. Frederick Capon never saved another life. Harold Goldberg never sailed again. The Doodler represents a terrifying intersection of vulnerability and predation. He is a reminder that the most dangerous monsters are often the ones who smile at you, who buy you a drink, who ask to draw your picture. He is a reminder that societal prejudice can be an accomplice to murder. We are left with a haunting image of a man sitting in a dim bar, charcoal in hand, looking at a stranger with a mixture of artistic appreciation and murderous intent. The scratch of the pencil on paper, the clinking of glasses, the laughter of a community finding its freedom, and the silent, deadly gaze of the predator in their midst. The $100,000 reward still stands. The San Francisco Police Department has not given up, but with every passing year, the window for justice narrows. Memories fade, witnesses die, evidence crumbles. The Doodler may well take his secrets to the grave, leaving behind only a legacy of pain and a handful of sketches that were never found. This case forces us to look in the mirror. It forces us to examine how we treat the marginalized, how we handle the victims of crime, and how the silence of a few can alter the course of history for so many. The Doodler walked free because society had built a prison for his victims. This brings us to the end of our deep dive into the darkness of 1970s San Francisco. But the file is not closed. The questions remain. I want to turn this over to you, the DCF Investigations community. Do you believe that the identity of the Doodler should be released even if he cannot be prosecuted? Do you think the survivors were justified in their silence given the era they lived in? And most chillingly, do you think those sketches still exist somewhere, hidden away in a dusty box? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every theory, every insight. If you have any information regarding this case, no matter how small, please contact the San Francisco Police Department. Justice delayed is justice denied, but perhaps, just perhaps, it is not too late. This is DCF Investigations. We shine the light where others fear to tread. Stay safe, stay observant, and never forget that the person sitting next to you might just be drawing their next victim. Until next time.